Allianz is the largest insurer and financial services company in Germany. In fact, they're the largest insurer and financial services company in all of Europe. And they've just released their global trade survey for 2025. And as you can imagine, this survey is full of all kinds of consternation and anxiety from the companies they surveyed around the world. And the reason for that is it is a global survey. Now, when it comes to the United States, I would say things for companies in the United States are looking pretty good. And the tariffs, which feature largely in this survey, in fact, everything in this survey is basically revolving around the tariff situation. It looks like things are going well for the United States, and the tariffs are already achieving their desired goals. So, really, the leading kind of fact in this survey is the fact that 90% of US companies plan on reshoring some of their supplies or production back to the United States from overseas. 90%. That's a massive number. It's higher than any other country in the world. So we'll go into some of the details here. This survey really focuses on what's going on with tariffs in the world and all the changes that are going on in the world because of tariffs, almost entirely based on tariffs. And the main regions that they're talking about are, of course, the United States, China, and Europe, and especially Germany within Europe. They do mention Latin America as well, but that's not really a main focus of the survey. One of the interesting things about this survey is it shows that companies and suppliers are trying to push the cost of the tariffs off onto anyone else they can. Now, in some cases, it is their customers, but they're not going to be able to put the full cost of tariffs onto their customers. So essentially, what they're doing is they're pushing the tariff cost back to their suppliers, and it's going all the way, it's rippling all the way up the supply chain to the start of the supply chain. And this is where most of the costs are being borne, is up the supply chain. And this is something that we're already starting to see in news stories that have been coming out over the past few weeks. I've been posting videos about this. But I just wanted to give you one quote from this report, and it says, "Our survey shows buyers' Incoterms moving towards delivered duty paid globally, thereby leaving the seller with the responsibility to manage the logistics and costs, including customs, all the way to the buyer's locations." So the Incoterms are the international commerce terms, and the delivered duty paid means that the tariffs have to be already paid on the delivery. So these are the types of terms that suppliers and companies are looking for in their contracts. I also wanted to mention the reshoring, especially when it comes to the United States. Now, internationally, they said 86% of the companies plan to reshore production and supplies domestically, which sounds awfully high to me. Especially with a lot of the European companies, companies and countries that depend on exports. The same is true of China. China, of course, depends on exports, but they had an odd way of stating it in the report that less than or not more than 20% of Chinese, 20% or more Chinese companies had no plans of reshoring. There's kind of a backwards way that they stated it there, and they weren't very clear on it. But anyway, when it comes to the United States, let me get you the quote here exactly. "Reshoring as a potential response to threats of supply chains. Nearly 90% of respondents expect to switch most or some of their manufacturing facilities and suppliers to domestic ones after Liberation Day. But it is likely easier said than done." So that's the quote. And that's companies planning on reshoring. But there's actually 60% of American companies have already located destinations. So here's another quote for you. "For companies with longer supply chains and a larger share, more than half of production abroad, the concern around geopolitics is even more striking. 53 versus 60%, and 40% of them have already found relocation destinations for their supply chains. This is even more obvious in the US, where nearly 60% of such firms have already found relocation destinations. And they say, see figure 8, which I'll post figure 8 here for you to see. If you'd like to look at this in more detail, just pause the video. So essentially, their conclusion is that de-risking is likely to continue. And de-risking is what they mean by de-risking is that supply chains will essentially shorten to kind of blocks or much shorter distances, probably North America in its own block, China, and maybe the ASEAN countries, and then maybe Europe. That would kind of be what de-risking looks like, because the countries in these different blocks will be favorable towards one another. One of the optimistic or rosy scenarios they have for Europe, but remember this is Allianz is a European company, is they have they're making the possibility that there may be some scenario for rapprochement between Europe and Asia, or Europe and China primarily. But I really don't see how this can work with Europe and China, because they both have the same problem. They both have an export surplus with the United States, and neither one of them are really willing to buy each other's products. They don't need imports from one another. So neither one of them, they're like two wrong ends of the Lego bricks trying to fit together. They don't have what the other one needs. So I don't see how they can really spin this in any kind of positive way. There's nothing that Europe can't absorb any more goods, products and goods from China, and China doesn't really need any more from Europe. Europe's expensive and uncompetitive, and there are a few areas where they need Europe with a few high-tech things, but other than that, they don't need a lot from Europe, and they're certainly not looking for digital services from Europe, because Europe doesn't really have much in the way of digital services. All of Europe's digital services are essentially US digital services. That's who they rely on, as well as financial services. So there really isn't a good match between Europe and Asia. The actual natural match is between Europe and the United States. And unfortunately, because Europe is so uncompetitive in so many areas, because it's so highly regulated, Europe doesn't have a lot to offer to the United States, but the United States has a lot to offer to Europe. They just try to keep it out for the most part. Anyway, that is the gist of this report. If you like this kind of content, please give the video a like, and please subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.